This will be our Genus Homo lecture. So we're going to start out by talking about the earliest member of Genus Homo, which is Homo habilis. The nickname for Homo habilis is the handyman. It got that nickname because it's believed that Homo habilis may be the first user and maker of stone tool technology. This is debated since there is some evidence that some of the Australopithecines, like Australopithecus gari, may have also used and made stone tools, but that's where he gets his nickname, the handyman. Date range for this species is between 2.5 to about 1.8 million years ago. The features that you're going to see, so we just have an Australopith out here for comparison. You may remember this from our last video lecture. So when you're looking at the Australopith, you turn it over, look at the superior view, and you see that there's a decent amount or extreme degree of postorbital constriction. And then in comparison, when you're looking at Homo habilis, you turn it over and look at the superior view. There is definitely still some constriction, but it's not nearly as extreme. So we have a slight degree of postorbital constriction. The zygomatic flare is also slight. When we turn it and look at the side, we see that there's a slight degree of prognathism. So prognathism is referring to how far does the midface and the jaw jut forward when looking at the skull from a lateral view, a view from the side. So Lucy has a far more prognathic face with the midface and the jaw jutting forward. Homo habilis also, when you look at it from the anterior view, from the front, you can see that it's much more rounded and globular. We're getting to be much more human-like in its appearance, obviously still smaller. Cranial capacity for Homo habilis is between 500 to 650 cc's, and they utilized Oldowan tool technology. So they have these choppers, and so these tools are used mainly for scavenging. It's very likely that Homo habilis was not hunting yet, but using these tools for scavenging, and possibly also getting tubers out from underneath the ground. All right, so then next we're going to move on to what we'll call middle level genus Homo, Homo erectus and Homo ergaster. So their date range goes from about 1.8 to 200,000 years before present. Some of the big changes that we're going to see behavior-wise is Homo erectus is the first to migrate out of Africa. Paleoanthropologists sometimes divide this into two species, Homo erectus being the species that lives in Eurasia, and then Homo ergaster being the species that lives in Africa. Anatomically speaking, the main differences, Homo ergaster tends to be slightly more gracile. Homo erectus tends to be more robust. But other than that, they have anatomical features that are similar. They have a slight degree of postorbital constriction. So we turn the skull over. We see that there is some constriction behind the brow, but not nearly as extreme as with the Australopithecines. We see that they have this double-arched supraorbital ridge or double-arched brow. The zygomatic flare is slight. Dentition is more generalized. Homo erectus is starting to eat a more omnivorous diet, so an inclusion of plants, fruits, tubers, and some degree of meat. They also have this feature down the sagittal suture called the sagittal keel. So I always say you have to feel the keel. You can see the crest. In the robust Australopithecines, we had that sagittal crest, the bony mohawk going down the center. The keel is in a similar location, but it's much more slight. So I say you have to feel the keel. And when you turn it over, it looks kind of like a canoe at the bottom. So it has that keeling. So the thickening of the cranial bones for Homo erectus is generally thought to be due to cold adaptations and powerful face and muscles in the jaw as well. And then Homo ergaster has similar features. Ergaster is more gracile, so generally the brow ridge is not quite as robust. This is the Turkana boy or Narcotomi boy. This individual would have been about 8 or 9 at time of death. Likely died due to an infection in the tooth and the molar. So prior to modern dentistry, a toothache could actually lead to death, since a severe infection prior to antibiotics could lead to severe consequences for the individual. But other than the slighter brow ridges, more gracile features, ergaster is anatomically similar to erectus. All right, so with Homo erectus, we also have that first migration out of Africa. That's a big deal because all of the Australopithecines and Homo habilis are contained to the continent of Africa, but we see examples of erectus in Europe and Asia. We see control of fire, likely for the first time, and that would be a big deal because they're able to extract additional nutrients from their food. They're able to use fire for protection, and they're also able to use fire for warmth, which may have given them the ability to migrate to colder regions outside of Africa. Homo erectus likely engaged in persistence hunting. Their main tool technology is the Acheulean toolkit. So the biface hand axe here was used mainly for scavenging and possibly some degree of persistence hunting. So the way that humans hunt, they're not necessarily faster than their prey, but they have more endurance because humans, by the time we get to Homo erectus, we've likely started to lose our body hair. So as we're running and sweating, the sweat is cooling us by evaporating off the surface of our skin. So we're also able to, based upon our bipedal adaptations, we have greater endurance than a lot of quadrupedal animals. So we're able to engage in persistence hunting to wear down our prey. And cranial capacity, we see a larger cranial capacity in Homo habilis. So range for erectus and ergaster somewhere between 800 to 1100 cc's. So that was our first significant jump. Many paleoanthropologists believe that that's connected to increased quality of the diet. So they're not only eating just vegetation, fruits, tubers, they're also starting to include more meat in the diet. But again, that is debated, and obviously in modern day we can get protein from other sources other than meat, but at least 1.8 million years ago we all of a sudden have a higher quality of food in the diet, which may have allowed for the brain to expand. And then we're moving on to Homo heidelbergensis. So we see examples of heidelbergensis in Africa and Europe. It is believed that heidelbergensis is the common ancestor of both the Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, the African forms eventually leading to Homo sapiens, and the European forms eventually leading to Neanderthalensis. So the features that you're going to see, so heidelbergensis is generally considered to be a mosaic, a mixture of features, some similar to Homo erectus, and then some similar to Neanderthalensis and Homo sapiens. And that would make sense if heidelbergensis is, in fact, a common ancestor of both Neanderthalensis and Homo sapiens. So we turn the skull over, and we see that there is a slight degree of postorbital constriction. We see that the forehead is starting to move a little bit higher. We still have, overall, a long, low-sloping forehead, but you can see it starting to move a little bit higher. When we turn the skull to the side, we can see there's some mid-phase prognathism, but it's not extreme. We can see there is a slight degree of zygomatic flare. And we can see, when we turn it around, for the first time, we can see that the maximum skull breadth is moving up to the parietals here. With the Australopithecines and early genus Homo, the widest point was always down here at the base. And then for heidelbergensis, we can see that the widest point has moved up to the top of the parietal bone. And then also a pretty generalized dentition, indicating a very omnivorous diet. Dentition is getting smaller, indicating that they may be starting to use fire and tool technology to help process their food prior to consumption. So it's reducing the stress on the jaw muscles. All right, and they use the Mousterian tool technology. However, this is somewhat debated. Mousterian tools are definitely associated with the Neanderthals and possibly also with heidelbergensis. There's evidence of symbolic mass burial, considered to be the common ancestor of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, and another slight jump in cranial capacity, about 1100 to 1300 cc's for heidelbergensis. So then we're moving on to the Neanderthals. So the Neanderthals, their date range goes from about 300,000 to as recently as 30,000 years before present. There is some evidence that they may have been around as recently as 20,000 years ago, but again, that is somewhat debated. So these are the more solidly supported dates here. The Neanderthals do have a slight degree of postorbital constriction. So we'll turn it over, look at the superior view. We can see there is a slight degree of constriction. Some of the really distinctive features, the Neanderthal has a wide nasal aperture. That's a cold adaptation. They have a very pronounced double arch supraorbital ridge, double arch brow. Their zygomatic bones are kind of sunken in. So not only do they not have flare, but their zygomatic bones kind of sink in. They have mid-face prognathism. So when you turn the skull and look at the lateral view, you can see that the mid-face region is projecting forward. And there's also a feature here in the back called the occipital bun. So this is where the nuchal ligament would attach. That's the ligament in our neck that attaches to the back of our cranium that keeps our head from pitching back and forth too extremely during bipedal walking, running, and jogging. That's the Neanderthal. The Neanderthals utilized Mousterian, or sometimes called Middle Paleolithic tool technology, and they also engaged in hunting. They likely had fairly dangerous hunting strategies that required them to be very close to dangerous prey, which is why paleoanthropologists have found Neanderthal remains with skeletal fractures, some that have healed, some that have not. But you can imagine, living during the Pleistocene, living during the last ice age. They likely had very high caloric demands, very large brain size. The brain is a very metabolically expensive organ. They need a lot of calories to support it. So they needed to consume as much high quality protein as possible. But there is also a lot of evidence that the Neanderthals also consumed vegetation. They've done studies on the dental calculus that shows that Neanderthals also consumed vegetation. So it's likely that they really only relied heavily on meat when they had to, and it was cold enough that there wasn't a whole lot of plant material available, so they were relying more heavily on protein. And then we move over here to Homo sapiens, us. So Homo sapiens date between about 300,000 to 200,000 is the beginning start date. It really solidly supported at least 200,000 years before present to present. But there is some new finds in northern Africa that suggest that Homo sapiens may date back as far as 300,000 years before present. So the features that we're going to see with Homo sapiens is no constriction. So when we're looking at it from the superior view, it does not sink in at all behind the brow here. Also, if you want to feel your own forehead, if you start at the brow and go up to your hairline, you see there's no constriction behind the brow. Homo sapiens have a very slight brow ridge, very slight supraorbital ridge. They have a narrow nasal aperture. They have a protruding mandibular symphysis, or chin. So that's another easy way to tell if you're looking at a Homo sapien. There will be a protruding mandibular symphysis here, and then also a vertical forehead with no postorbital constriction. The zygomatic bones are very slight, very gracile. When you turn the skull over or to the side and look at for prognathism, you see that Homo sapiens have a very vertical face, so almost no prognathism. And of course, it depends on what skull you're looking at, but Homo sapiens have almost no prognathism. You turn it over and look at the back, you can see that the maximum skull breadth, the widest point, is all the way up here at the top, at the parietals. So Homo sapiens and Neanderthals very likely interbred and produced viable fertile offspring. There was a Neanderthal genome study done at the site in Croatia back in 2010 that supports that between 1% to 4% of our genome is derived directly from Neanderthals. That's somewhere between 200 to 300 haplotypes derived directly from Neanderthals. So that supports that there is at least some degree of interbreeding and some degree of producing viable fertile offspring. So some even argue that if that's what's happening, that we maybe shouldn't even consider Neanderthals and Homo sapiens completely separate species. It's possible